And I want to introduce Professor Alessandro Delfanti. I ask our technical team to change the settings to go on with the next presentation. Alessandro Delfanti, I am asking to unmute. Okay. Welcome.
Hello.
Alessandro Delfanti is a professor at the University of Toronto, and he has been involved in research on science communication previously, and his focus in recent years, which is the topic of the speech of today, is what the patents that Amazon has been working on can tell us of the future of the relationship between man and machine in the workplace. So since we are a bit late, I hope Professor Delfanti will add to my very, very synthetic presentation whatever he finds useful. And please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, so you should be able to see my first slide now, just the title. Is that?
Yes, we are.
Okay, so yeah, I'm an associate professor at the University of Toronto, originally from Italy, of course. So just a new Canadian, new settler in Canada. I come from a science communications background, so I still teach journalism classes, although my new focus is on the relationship between technology and work. And I also used to work as a science journalist back in the day, so it's a job I really miss. So I'm very happy that you invited me to talk at this conference. And so what I've been doing in the last few years is study. Sorry, let me move. Yeah, there you go. Study Amazon warehouses and the labor process inside these places. So these are the gigantic warehouses owned by Amazon. This is where your stuff is when you order something online. There is a few hundreds of those around the world, mostly positioned in the periphery of major urban centers. Each of these big fulfillment centers, as Amazon calls them, may employ thousands of workers, so up to 3,000 or 4,000 workers. It's been in the news a lot, work at Amazon, in terms of job creation and job destruction, working conditions inside the warehouse, also worker unrest, strikes, and all the rest of it in the last couple of years. It's also been in the news because of the virus. So quite a few outbreaks in Amazon warehouses in the last few months. And also a big push to Amazon's business because of more people ordering online to avoid leaving home because of the coronavirus. So I've been doing interviews with workers working in the warehouse, but also I've been analyzing the technological infrastructure that Amazon deploys in these places. So today I'm going to talk about that a little bit. So these warehouses are already partially automated. So for example, I want to say roughly maybe 1/3 of these warehouses deployed these robots called Kiva robots. Basically, they go and fetch a shelf for you if you as a worker need to, retrieve, for example, the coffee mug that I just ordered online. The robot is going to go fetch the shelf where the coffee mug is stored and bring it to you, so you can actually retrieve it and send it to shipment. So this is the present. This is the most important technology related to automation that's currently deployed in Amazon warehouses. But what about the future, though? So this is a classical question for whoever is interested in science and technology. So for example, as science journalists, we have to deal with scientists' kind of future-oriented statements or promises of something happening in the future. Just thinking right now at all the coronavirus vaccines that are in development or in various phases of testing right now. So this is there's something about the present, something being tested, and there is something about the future, the promise that it will work in the future and maybe help us overcome this crisis. So in the case of Amazon, the most interesting, I think, kind of future-oriented discourse is that of automation. So will Amazon be one of the companies at the forefront of automation? Will we have full automation? Will robots replace workers? Will we have unemployment caused by the increased rate of automation in our workplaces? Some of the kind of discourses around that tend to be very dystopian. So this is just a funny GIF. So this is a drone that has replaced your delivery worker, comes to your place, trying to deliver a package. You're not at home, goes away, comes back the next day. You're still not there, gets real mad and blows your house up. So this is just a funny kind of dystopian science fiction like picture of what Amazon will do in a funny future. I mean, more seriously, of course, how do you study the future? So how do you go beyond speculation when trying to understand what the technological future is going to look like? There are a few things you can use to kind of approach the future and study the future. So of course, public claims made by scientists or engineers, post-dinner speeches, investment decisions, prototypes, of course, even science fiction, that's one of the speculative examples, of course. So my choice has been to focus on patents. So lately, patents have been quite part of the game in terms of news around Amazon work and Amazon more in general. So they've made the news also in quite a bombastic way in many cases. And not only for Amazon, but here's a couple of examples coming of headlines coming from covering Amazon patents. Of course, I guess you can't really talk at a journalists' conference without showing some headlines, right? So I mean, I don't think so. So this is my slide with headlines. Indeed, patents are a very interesting object to try and grasp the future because they describe in detail technology that's not quite there yet, but it's being designed, imagined, and maybe even developed. They also have another very interesting feature, which is that they are public documents. So their public nature means that you can search for them, search their text. You can easily retrieve patents. You can use several databases and search engines, including Google Patents. Here I'm showing the European Patent Office database, searchable, and then the US Patent and Trademark Office patent database, also easily searchable. So they are meant to make an invention public, to claim that it's original, and like to expose it to other people who may claim that it's not. They are a form of intellectual property. So owning a patent means owning intellectual property over a future or present technology or invention. They're kind of ideal because of this. They're also kind of ideal in terms of looking at how technological futures are literally owned by corporations even before they actually materialize. So for this research, me and my co-author analyzed thousands of patents owned by Amazon in the US. We basically detected and then studied more in depth a few hundreds that have to do with technology that may be used in the warehouse, vis-a-vis patents Amazon owns for, you can imagine, like web services, cloud computing, all the other businesses that Amazon has got under its wing. So we focused on technology that has to do with warehousing and specifically with stuff that has to do with the relation between workers and machines on the shop floor, which was what interested us in this case. So a few examples from my research. Oh no, sorry. This is I also wanted to mention that they also allow you to see who the inventors are. They contain thorough description of the invention, drawings, and also they allow you to reconstruct the kind of network of other patents that are cited in a patent. So you can go backwards and see which other technologies, other patents have inspired a new one. So some examples from our research are quite futuristic. For example, this is a floating warehouse that's supposed to fly over, for example, a stadium where a football game is being played. Let's say Trieste's team is playing Piacenza, which is my hometown's team. So you're at the stadium watching the game, this thing flies over you, and then drones, you can see the drones on the left side of the image, will deliver whatever you order through your phone, like for example, popcorn or your team's jersey or something like that. Another patent describes the docking stations possibly inside the floating warehouse. So these are stations where the drones are checked, recharged, loaded with the next order, and then shipped to the stadium again, or to whatever other place the warehouse is serving. But many patents. So while these two kind of imagine a futuristic, almost maybe we could say fully automated version of a warehouse, and even of the kind of last mile delivery part of what Amazon does, many patents actually assume that humans are going to persist and be present in the warehouse in a new relationship with machines. So this one is a famous wristband that was covered quite a few times in the news. Basically vibrates, perceives your hand's position in space, and then vibrates to tell you whether your movement is correct. So as you are approaching a cell to pick my famous coffee mug, the wristband vibrates to tell your hand to go a little further to the right, and so like immediately go to the correct cell in the shelf. So this one has to do with increasing efficiency, speeding up human labor, and also surveillance of workers. This one is not too dissimilar. So this is a camera mounted on glasses that a worker will wear. It analyzes whenever a worker looks at a cell. In this case, the worker is to, sorry, I have to start by saying this. In this case, the worker is to store the coffee mug in the shelf, not to retrieve it. So the camera on the glasses analyzes in real time the way in which other commodities, other items are positioned in a cell, and communicates to the worker which is the best way to store the next object in that cell. So for example, vertically, or maybe you can store 2 of those in that cell. So again, this is to do with speeding up human labor and also increasing the efficiency of the storage system, like storing more stuff in less space. This is a augmented reality kind of visor, which overlays visual information on the visual field of a worker. For example, an arrow telling you which aisle you are to turn on to go and retrieve the coffee mug. So again, this is about speeding up work, and also maybe we could mention for this case further integration between machines and the worker's body. So not replacing workers, but mostly making them more efficient. This one is a little different. This is to do with worker surveillance. So this is again augmented reality glasses that a manager would wear. So in this case, the technology imagined by Amazon in this patent kind of tells the supervisor or the manager as they look at a certain worker, gives them information about that worker, name, status, I don't know what that means exactly, the history, the kind of tasks they have lined up, and so on and so forth. So this is a system to increase the management's ability to survey workers and interact more efficiently with workers. Some have to do with time motion analysis, so increasing the efficiency of the way in which the labor process is performed. This is something typical of factory work since the last century, literally. But in this case, rather than observing very closely the movements of a worker's body and then changing those movements to make the worker produce more pieces per hour or something like that. In this case, the information is actually fed to a robot. So this is about teaching the robot, not the worker. So let's say the robotic arm needs to pick that coffee mug, and because of the immense diversity of objects that are stored in a warehouse with different shapes, weights, fragility, you name it, there's going to be many different possible sets of movements or series of movements that the robotic arm needs to perform depending on what the item is. So in this case, the robotic arm can access a database of gripping strategies, a database of items, maybe can alone perform the task. If it finds itself unable to perform the task, the system will mobilize a worker, a human worker, maybe wearing a glove that transformed the movements and pressure and blah, blah, blah of the worker's hand into digital information that's fed to a computer and then back into the robotic arm. So literally the robotic arm can copy the worker's hand's movement. And if that strategy is successful to pick the coffee mug, then that strategy will be stored in the database and made accessible to not only to these robotic arms, but to other robotic arms in the same warehouse and in other warehouses around the world. So in this case, it's more about using the worker's body to teach machines how to operate or to improve the way in which machines operate. This one has to do again with the idea that workers will still be needed in a warehouse, but there's going to be a sort of a new kind of division of labor between robots and humans. So this patent actually imagines a warehouse where an algorithmic system analyzes the item that's to be picked and then sent to shipping and decides whether it can be manipulated by a robot or whether a human hand or a human body is needed. So if in the second case, the commodity, the item that's been ordered will be sent maybe through a Kiva robots, the robots we saw at the very beginning. The shelf containing that item is going to be sent to a workstation staffed by humans rather than robots. So this is about division of labor, not between different workers with different skills, but between human workers and robots. Last but not least, sort of the automation of relational labor, maybe we could call it. So this is a system that analyzes a person's position in space, movements, and expressions, like facial expressions, to figure out whether they are lost. So imagine you're a worker looking for the famous mug, and they just can't figure out where it is on the shelf. So you're walking up and down the aisle, you're looking confused. So the system of sensors captures all those things. An algorithm crunches the data and decides that you need help. And that's when an assistant pops up and asks, how can I help you? Do you need anything? And that can be either a robotic assistant or a supervisor, for example. So this is about automating the kind of relational labor we do when we help each other. So humans still involved make the process more efficient. All right, so as I was analyzing the patents, I was also reading very closely their text, their descriptions, because they actually are very telling of the way in which Amazon engineers and lawyers imagine the labor process in the warehouse. So there are sentences that could come from, from a labor study textbook, but they actually come from some of those patents. So in one case, the sentence, one quote, automation is expensive and time consuming to implement, unlike a human workforce. which is more flexible and cheaper to implement, unquote. So there is this consciousness that humans will never go away because they can be cheaper and more flexible and less time consuming than automation, depending on the process that they have to perform. But on the other hand, and I quote another patent again, quote, "It is inevitable that the paths of the robots and humans working in the warehouse will cross," unquote. So Amazon is also, while it's assuming that humans will not go away, it's also concerned that the interaction between humans and robots will need to be made safe, efficient, and valuable for the company. All right. So these were some examples from my research. In my own research, you can find the paper online. I kind of describe this using a sort of a Marxist lens. Kind of go back to the way in which, again, sort of a more political, if you wish, kind of take on what happens, what would happen if those technologies will actually come to be used in a warehouse. So I describe a future where, I think I did describe a future where workers are increasingly dominated through technology, but also directly by technology as workers come to serve the technology, serve machinery rather than vice versa, rather than the other way around. So I kind of use a definition where I say that humans extend automation. So machines use humans or something like that. Anyway, this is if you're interested in a more theoretical take. But I wanted to wrap this up. I think I have another minute or two. Is that correct, Fabio? Yeah.
I just was wondering if there are any questions, but
let me just wrap this up with one last thing. Okay, this is again the kind of dystopian or kind of futuristic floating warehouse. I wanted to wrap this up with a sort of a methodological kind of take on the use of patents, possibly useful for journalists to think through this. So they cannot be taken at face value because they present a number of epistemic and methodological problems. So I'm just listing a few ones. So they're not technical documents. They're written mostly by lawyers. So you can't really rebuild the technology using the information contained in a patent in a sense. They can be used simply as defensive weapons to kind of fence off competition with the threat of litigation. It's like, okay, you cannot develop technology X because I own a patent on that. I'll never develop it. That's not the point. The point is preventing you from developing it. They have a complex social life, so they acquire value in different spheres. So for example, public communications about patents may not have to do with the actual future materialization of those technology, but maybe they may have to do with the desire to communicate with investors who decide where to invest their money based on future projections, claims of future value, and stuff like that. They're very broad in scope. So this is one of the most contested kind of features of patents. So you have to be very careful. They tend to cover lots of ground, again, because of this role as a defensive device. So they tend to try to cover, to protect any technology related to a certain process so that competition cannot enter that field at all. The human is invisible in patents. So you have these faceless silhouettes. It's the bodies are completely invisible. So in my case, for example, the very important kind of, social composition of the workforce in Amazon warehouses, which has to do with race and class and gender differences and fault lines, is just impossible to sort out by looking at the patents. So they just assume this faceless, genderless body. And then last but not least, it's impossible to tell which technology will actually be built. So which patents will actually materialize and become actual technologies that they will use, and which are also already in use, maybe. So these are some caveats in terms of using patents to describe future technology. You have to be attentive. I've been trying to summarize that in the paper if you're interested. And I think that was it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Delfanti. Oh, okay, I see a comment. So interesting, both methodology and findings. I was wondering if there is any question. We have a couple of minutes more. Maybe while our listeners make up their mind, I was wondering, you already said about your perspective. I was wondering if there ever was any attempt of publicly discussing the caveats around these new technologies and the employment of these new technologies in order for Amazon to prevent backlash. I mean, they need to invest a lot of money to develop a new technology, and I guess that they can expect trade unions, in case the worst case scenario you mentioned became a reality, they may be accepted maybe in some parts of the world, but not in Europe. So can you tell anything about the relationship between innovation and society from Amazon?
Yeah, I think, for example, in the case of the bracelet, the wristband, there were lots of pushbacks from unions, but also from governments. Like, for example, in Italy, that was discussed even by top level ministers in the government. So Amazon did kind of come up with a public communication strategy to kind of counter those accusations. And in the bracelets case, they just said it's very unlikely we'll ever actually use this thing or develop this thing. In other cases, they will not say that, but maybe they will try to, in publicly, try to defend themselves from accusations of like misuse of these technologies, for example. So definitely, it's a fight they fight in the public sphere, and they're very engaged in doing that because of the increased media and political attention around work in their warehouses.
So if I get it right, currently their attitude is to limit the damage, but paying lip service to the worries instead of trying to address the worries.
I think in some cases they've just denied that the technology will ever be used. While in some cases they've been trying to minimize the possible risks associated with the technology. Like again with the wristband and also this cage that was described in a patent where a worker will be in a cage and the cage will move around and take the worker to different shelves, for example. They just straight out said, that's never going to happen. Yeah, we own the patent, but it's never going to happen. Which opens the question of why would you even deposit a patent about that, of course.
Okay, I see that. I assume that the listeners were very satisfied. I liked very much your presentation. I want to thank you very much for that. I want to stay on time with the schedule. We have finished the time. I thank again Professor Alessandro Delfanti, and I invite you after the short break. We are having a long break on this track. But on the other track, on the main track, in 10 minutes, we will have Siri Carpenter, the science journalist from the United States, from the Open Notebook, who will tell us interesting stuff on basically crafting science, the craft of science journalism. She's working on a project with the Knight Science Journalism Fellowship. And then the program on this track will come back at 4 with another very interesting panel. So thank you very much for being with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
And okay, so now I ask the technical staff to send the pause slide here.